In the 18th century, along the eastern coast of North America, 13 small colonies lived under the rule of the British Empire, an empire so vast and so powerful that it stretched across continents, controlling lands, oceans, and millions of people under a single crown. To many, British rule seemed unshakable, permanent, almost eternal. But across the Atlantic Ocean, far from the king's direct reach, something was beginning to change, slowly at first, then all at once. The people of the colonies were growing restless. They were being taxed, without representation, controlled without a voice, and governed by laws they had no power to influence. At first, the anger was quiet, almost invisible. It lived in whispered conversations, in crowded taverns, in dimly lit rooms where men gathered behind closed doors, speaking carefully, watching, waiting. Because speaking openly against the British Empire was dangerous. But the frustration continued to grow. Each new law, each new tax, each new act of control pushed the colonies closer to something inevitable, something that could no longer be stopped. Britain, confident in its dominance, did not see the danger. To them, the colonies were distant, manageable, obedient. They believed control was absolute. But beneath the surface, the fire of revolution had already been lit. And in 1775, everything changed. The first shots rang out at Lexington and Concord, echoing across the land, marking the beginning of a war that would change history forever. What started as a small conflict quickly became a full-scale revolution. On one side stood the British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world, disciplined, trained, and experienced in war. On the other side stood a group of colonies, unprepared, untrained, and vastly outnumbered. It was a fight that seemed impossible, a small militia against the strongest army on earth. They lacked resources, they lacked experience, and many believed they lacked any real chance of victory, but they possessed something far more powerful than weapons or numbers. They possessed belief, the belief that they deserved freedom, the belief that they could decide their own future, and the belief that even the strongest empire could be challenged. At the center of this struggle stood a man who would become a symbol of that belief, George Washington. He was not given a perfect army. He inherited a force that was divided, exhausted, and often on the edge of collapse. Soldiers lacked food, they lacked proper clothing, they lacked even the most basic supplies needed to survive, and yet they continued. Through brutal winters, through hunger, through defeat after defeat, Washington refused to surrender. At Valley Forge, one of the darkest moments of the war, soldiers endured freezing temperatures, starvation, and unimaginable hardship. Many did not survive, but those who did emerged stronger, more determined, more united, and still, the war continued. For years the outcome remained uncertain. Victory seemed distant, almost unreachable, until everything changed once again. France entered the war. A powerful ally joined the fight, bringing with it resources, troops, and a navy that would challenge British control of the seas. For the first time, the balance of power began to shift. The colonies were no longer alone. The war grew larger. The battles became more intense, more decisive, more brutal, and then the moment arrived that would define everything. Yorktown, the final battlefield. The British army, led by General Cornwallis, found itself trapped, surrounded by American and French forces, cut off from escape. There was no way out. Washington saw the opportunity, and he did not hesitate. He moved in, closing the trap. Cannons roared, the ground shook, smoke filled the air as the battle reached its peak. Every moment pushed the British closer to defeat. And then, silence. On October 19th, 1781, the unthinkable happened. The British Empire, the most powerful force in the world, surrendered. The war was over. What began as 13 struggling colonies had become something more. A new nation was born, the United States of America, a nation built not on power, but on the idea of freedom, an idea that would echo across the world, inspiring revolutions, shaping history, and changing the future forever. Because in the face of overwhelming odds against an empire that seemed unstoppable, they made a choice. They chose to fight, they chose to believe, they chose freedom, and against all expectations, they won.